We can now bring in Simon Mabon, a professor of international relations at Lancaster University. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us on the program today. What is Donald Trump hoping to get out of his visit to Saudi Arabia and the wider region? Is it only about business contracts?
Well, I think to understand Donald Trump's foreign policy, we need to understand a bit about Donald Trump. He's a businessman, he's a transactional man. And I think that what he's trying to do with going to the Gulf right now is certainly to secure a lot of trade contracts, to secure economic investment in the US, but it's also to build up those personal relationships that he had the last time around, to ensure that they are still there, to keep the Gulf states incredibly close, to keep them friendly. And then from there is the chance of working on other things, be it political issues, diplomatic initiatives, regional security architecture. But for Trump, it's transactional. So, of course, it all starts with the money.
Okay, it all starts with the money. The last time around, during his first presidency, Donald Trump also visited Saudi Arabia in his first trip as president. But back then, he also visited the state of Israel. This time, there's no trip to Israel being planned. The U.S. relationship with Israel may be ironclad, but what is the relationship like between the two men right now, between the two leaders?
Well, that seems to be deteriorating by the day. There's a number of different divergent points that have seemingly pushed the two leaders, if not necessarily the two states, on different paths. And they, of course, speak to the approach to Gaza, to everything that is happening in Gaza and Israel's continued devastation of Gaza, but also on Iran. We know that Trump is pushing for a nuclear agreement with Iran, which is ironic given that he was the one that withdrew from the first Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the nuclear deal, back in his first administration. And that is not something that Benjamin Netanyahu wants Trump to do. He does not want a new Iranian nuclear deal. But I think one of the other reasons for Trump being in the Gulf right now and not necessarily visiting Israel or anywhere else in the Middle East for that matter is to shore up support for any deal that does eventually get over the line. And I would imagine that a deal will get over the line in terms of the nuclear agreement. But to do that, of course, he needs to ensure that the Gulf states are on board. And I think he's prioritizing that over Gaza, which perhaps tells you a lot about his view of Benjamin Netanyahu's approach to the war there.
Because we also have, since his first term in office, Tehran and Riyadh that have normalized ties thanks to China. Now, yesterday we saw the release of Ida and Alexander. We saw that the U.S. essentially bypassed Israel and spoke directly with Hamas to secure the release of the last Israeli-American hostage held by Hamas. Today we have Benjamin Netanyahu, who is saying that there's no situation where the war in Gaza stops, and he said that Israel is reportedly working with other countries to take in Gazans. Now, Donald Trump was the brainchild, the architect of those Abraham Accords we saw during his first term in office. Does Washington now realize that the much hyped normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel may never happen, even though Joe Biden, right till the end of his presidency, was working very hard for that to happen?
Yeah, he was working very hard. And I think that was one of the many things that Joe Biden dramatically got wrong with his approach to the Middle East. He should have realized very quickly that after October 7, after Israel's engagement in Gaza that led to the destruction of huge amounts of property and a catastrophic loss of life, that the Saudis could not, even if they necessarily wanted to, they could not normalize with Israel under those conditions. And I think Trump is perhaps recognizing that there is a different dynamic at play now. As much as he may wish to have a broader, financially driven Middle East and some type of neoliberal utopia, as we saw with that AI-produced video of him on the beach with Elon Musk and indeed Benjamin Netanyahu, I think there's perhaps an acceptance that that is not a reality right now, which perhaps explains why he's doubling down on the Gulf and trying to get the Iran deal over the line. But let's not forget that in the election campaign, he did hang his hat on this idea of being a peacemaker, be it in the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, or indeed in the war in Gaza and the destruction there. I don't think he's going to be wholly supportive of of the mass displacement of Palestinians from Gaza. I think that would be hugely destabilizing for the region, as long with being illegal under international law. But that would, I think, destabilize Trump's vision for an economically prosperous Middle East. And I think this goes back to what I was saying right at the start. This is a transactional man. The money matters, and it all starts with the money.
Given that Idan Alexander was released by Hamas, normally in the past, when Hamas has released prisoners, hostages, Palestinian prisoners have been released by Israel in exchange. Yesterday, we didn't see that happen. It was just one hostage that Hamas released. Could we have, because Donald Trump is in the region and is going to be listening to heavyweights in the region like Saudi Arabia, like the United Arab Emirates, like Qatar, could we have real pressure this time around from the United States to either end the war or allow in humanitarian aid, which has been blocked for over 2 months now?
Yeah, it's over 60 days since any type of humanitarian aid has got into Gaza, which has really had a devastating impact on the people there. The conditions are squalid, the conditions are deplorable, and this is entirely avoidable, of course. I can't envisage a situation where Trump is able to exert so much pressure on Mr. Netanyahu to stop the war, but I can envisage a scenario where he's able to get humanitarian aid in. And I think that's probably one of the reasons for Hamas releasing this hostage without the release of Palestinian prisoners in return. So I think that's probably what it is. It's about those small sort of maneuverings, and getting aid in is absolutely imperative right now. Of course, so is stopping the war. But right now, people are starving, people are suffering, people are dying because of a lack of food, malnutrition, and disease.
What I find difficult to understand with Donald Trump, I know you say he's a transactional president, but and now we see this embrace of the Middle Eastern powers, but at the same time at home, pro-Palestinian demonstrators are being muffled on college campuses in the United States. How do you explain that?
Well, look, I'm not an expert on Donald Trump. I'm not a psychologist. I'm sure there are many people who can do a better job of articulating a read of him. But I don't see that those two things are necessarily incompatible, that he's got this transactional view of how he wants his foreign policy to be. He's got a transactional view of how diplomacy wants to be. But then at home, he has also got a domestic agenda that he needs to adhere to. He's got support bases that are staunchly pro-Israel, that are staunchly anti-Palestinian, that veer into the racist, that veer into the xenophobic. And he needs to be seen to be doing something to quash that by his own supporters, by his own constituencies. And so the two don't necessarily sit neatly, logically together, but that doesn't mean that they are incompatible. And I think that's what we're starting to see here, that he's doing these things on the world stage, doing things that may seem at odds with that at home. But that's what makes Donald Trump who he is. He's a transactional, somewhat contradictory figure, and that's what's made it so elusive to really understand what he's all about, I think.
Interesting point, Simon Mabon. We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us on the program today.